There is something very strange happening in your life right now, Aquarius. And it's not chaos. It's not bad luck. It's not the universe punishing you. It's something much quieter. You're still showing up. Still doing what you're supposed to do. Still living the life that looks right from the outside. But inside, something has already left. Not your job. Not your relationship. Not your responsibilities. Your energy. And the most dangerous part is no one around you seems to notice. Not even you until now. If this already feels familiar, just type "I feel this" in the comments. And the strange thing is nothing dramatic has actually happened. No explosion. No betrayal. No obvious reason to panic. Life simply kept moving. And one day you realized you were moving with it, but not really inside it. It feels a bit like standing in a familiar room with all the furniture in the same place, the same walls, the same sounds, yet somehow the air is different, thinner. Quieter. Almost hollow. You start noticing little things. Not big enough to complain about. Not serious enough to explain to anyone. Just moments where your mind drifts while your body keeps performing the routine. You listen to people talk, but their words pass through you. You look at your own life, and it feels like a photograph of yourself rather than a mirror. And the hardest part is that no one would ever guess. You're still functioning, still responsible, still doing what needs to be done. But something inside you has stopped participating. Not out of sadness. Not out of anger. Just quiet withdrawal. Almost like your soul gently stepped back and said, "I will wait here until you notice me again." And that's when the deeper question begins to form. Not the kind you say out loud. The kind that sits in your chest at night. Is this really all I am meant to maintain? Or is there a version of me that never had the chance to exist? Because Aquarius, you were never designed for a life built only on endurance. You were designed for meaning, for ideas, for connection that feels alive, not merely stable. You carry an unusual kind of intelligence. Not just logical, not just emotional, but intuitive in a way that feels cosmic. As if part of you is always listening to something beyond schedules, beyond expectations, beyond survival. And when that part is ignored for too long, it doesn't scream, it doesn't rebel, it simply fades into the background, leaving you with a strange sensation, the feeling of being present without being fulfilled. Have you noticed that lately? You get tired of things that once satisfied you. Not bored, just untouched. Conversations feel repetitive. Goals feel inherited. Even success feels strangely quiet. Not wrong, just incomplete. Almost like you've been living a chapter that was necessary once, but no longer speaks your language. And maybe the reason this realization feels so unsettling is because it arrived without warning, without crisis, without permission. It arrived in the middle of normal life, which makes it harder to ignore and impossible to explain. So let me ask you something gently, not to challenge you, not to pressure you, just to open a door inside you. When was the last time you felt truly alive, not productive, not responsible, not useful, but alive in a way that made time disappear? Not a vacation memory, not fantasy, a moment where you felt like yourself again. Because that memory, however small, is not random. It is a signal. And signals don't appear unless something is already shifting beneath the surface. Quietly, subtly, but irreversibly. Something in you is remembering who you were before life taught you how to survive. And once that memory returns, even softly, even briefly, it becomes very difficult to keep pretending you don't feel the difference anymore. There is a kind of silence that only arrives when everything looks fine. Not peaceful silence. Not the kind you choose. The kind that grows inside a life that works on paper. A life people would nod at, respect, even envy in quiet ways. You wake up with a routine that knows you better than your own thoughts. Same streets. Same conversations. Same responsibilities repeating themselves like soft echoes. Nothing is broken enough to escape. Nothing is alive enough to stay for. And that is where Aquarius becomes dangerous to themselves. Because you are incredibly good at adapting. At finding logic inside discomfort. At convincing your heart that stability is a form of happiness. You can build a life that feels solid, predictable, safe, and still feel like you are living in someone else's body. Not trapped, just misplaced. You learn how to smile in the right moments, how to say the right things, how to be dependable, rational, mature. But deep down, something subtle starts to ache. Not pain, not sadness, more like a quiet erosion. The feeling that your days are being spent maintaining a version of yourself that no longer exists. Aquarius, you are not afraid of hard work. You are afraid of meaningless effort. And when your energy goes into roles that no longer inspire growth, your spirit doesn't fight. It withdraws. You become efficient, functional, emotionally distant from your own life. You still care about people, but you stop feeling moved by your own future. You plan because you should, not because it excites you. And that emptiness doesn't feel dramatic. It feels neutral, like living inside a well-designed waiting room. Everything is there. Comfort, structure, familiar faces. But nothing is calling you forward. And maybe the most painful part is this. You start to forget what it feels like to want something deeply. Not goals, not achievements. I mean desire that comes from the soul. Curiosity that makes time dissolve. That strange Aquarian spark that once made you feel different from the world, not separate, but connected in a unique way. When that spark dims, you do not collapse. You become polite with your own dreams. You tell yourself later. You tell yourself someday. You tell yourself it is not that bad. And you are right, it is not that bad. But it is not you. And that is the real loss. Because a life that slowly drains you does not feel like suffering. It feels like forgetting. Forgetting your intensity. Forgetting your imagination. Forgetting that you were never meant to live only for what is practical. So let me ask you gently, not as a challenge, but as a reflection. If nothing had to change for anyone else, if no one would judge you, if safety was guaranteed, what part of you would finally breathe again? Not escape, not restart. Just breathe. Because the moment you ask that question honestly, even in silence, even without answers, you are already no longer living inside the old cycle. You are standing at the edge of it. And Aquarius, the edge is where your real life always begins. There is something tender about the way you stayed. Not heroic, not tragic, just quiet loyalty. The kind that does not announce itself, but slowly becomes a part of your identity. You did not remain because you were afraid of pain. You remained because you understood consequences. You saw the invisible threads connecting your choices to other lives, to faces that depended on you, to systems you helped hold together. And so you learned how to carry weight gracefully. You became the one who thinks ahead, who absorbs pressure without making noise, who postpones their own rest so others can feel safe. That is not weakness, Aquarius. That is emotional intelligence turned inward. But sometimes, responsibility becomes a language you use to avoid listening to your deeper truth. Not because you are dishonest, but because you are kind. You tell yourself it is temporary. You tell yourself you are strong enough to wait. You tell yourself your desires can adapt, and for a long time, they do. Until one day they stop trying. Not in rebellion, not in anger. They simply grow quiet. You begin to live inside a version of yourself that is reliable, but not fully alive. You show up. You deliver. You do what needs to be done. Yet the inner voice that once asked for more becomes softer, more distant, easier to ignore. And maybe that is the real reason you stayed so long. Not fear, not attachment, but because you trusted yourself too much. You believed you could endure anything as long as it made sense. You believed your heart would adjust to logic. That fulfillment could be scheduled. That passion could wait its turn. Aquarius, your mind is powerful. It can build entire worlds inside explanations. But the soul does not operate on reasons. It operates on resonance. When something no longer resonates, it does not demand attention. It slowly withdraws its energy. You become tired in ways sleep cannot fix. You feel restless without knowing what you are missing. You start to crave silence, distance, space, not from people, from yourself. And still, you do not leave. Because leaving feels selfish. Because staying feels mature. Because starting over feels irresponsible. So you choose the version of yourself that is useful instead of fulfilled. And that choice is understandable. It is human, it is compassionate. But it is also where your light begins to dim. Not dramatically, just subtly, like a star that still shines but no longer warms. So let me ask you something softly. If your life did not require you to be strong, to be reasonable, to be the one who holds everything together, what would you choose simply because it feels true? Not practical, not impressive, just true. Because the part of you that stayed so long was not trying to avoid change. It was trying to protect love. And now, maybe it is time to redirect that protection inward. Not by destroying what you built. Not by abandoning your past. But by finally allowing yourself to exist without proving your worth through sacrifice. You did not stay because you were afraid to leave. You stayed because you forgot that your happiness was also a responsibility. And Aquarius, when you remember that, the chains called safety begin to feel less like protection and more like a door waiting to be opened. Not rushed, not forced, just gently unlocked. From the inside, there is a certain kind of tired that does not show up on the body. It does not look like exhaustion. It does not sound like complaint. It feels more like a dimming. Like the volume of life has been turned down so slowly that you cannot remember when the music changed. You still function. You still answer messages. You still smile at the right moments. But inside, something essential has gone quiet. Not broken, just absent. You wake up and nothing feels heavy, yet nothing feels meaningful either. You move through your days with skill, but without hunger. You are not sad. You are not numb. You are simply no longer touched. And that is the most invisible form of burnout. Because no one worries about a person who looks fine. They worry about tears. They worry about anger. They worry about collapse. They do not worry about the one who keeps going without feeling why. Aquarius, you learned long ago how to be emotionally self-sufficient, how to regulate yourself, how to stay composed when others fall apart. You became the calm one, the rational one, the one who does not need much. So, when your inner world started to thin out, you did not recognize it as a problem. You told yourself it was maturity. You told yourself it was stability. You told yourself you were just less dramatic now. But there is a difference between peace and emotional flatness. Peace feels spacious. Burnout feels empty. Peace gives you presence. Burnout removes desire. And what you are experiencing is not sadness. It is disconnection from your own emotional signal. The part of you that once reacted to beauty, to ideas, to possibility has gone offline to conserve energy. Not because you are weak, but because you have been strong for too long without being nourished. You have been outputting care, thought, responsibility, structure without enough input of wonder, creativity, or meaning. So your system adapted. It shut down the unnecessary feelings, the dreaming, the hoping, the longing. And now you live in a version of yourself that is efficient, reliable, and emotionally neutral. But something in you knows. Because you no longer look forward to things the way you used to. You no longer feel curious about the future. You no longer feel moved by your own potential. You exist in a gentle gray. Not dark. Not painful. Just colorless. And that is the kind of burnout nobody talks about. The kind where nothing is wrong, yet nothing feels right. The kind where life is not hurting you, but it is not feeding you either. So let me ask you something quietly. When was the last time you felt genuinely alive? Not because something went well, but because something inside you lit up. Not relief. Not accomplishment, but real emotional presence. Because your soul is not asking for rest. It is asking for reconnection. It does not need a vacation. It needs meaning. It needs depth. It needs to feel that your inner world still matters. You are not burned out from doing too much. You are burned out from not being touched by what you are doing. And that is why sleep does not help. And productivity does not help. And logic does not help. Because this is not about energy. It is about aliveness. The part of you that once felt expansive, imaginative, future-oriented has been living in survival mode. Not emotionally dramatic survival, but quiet emotional starvation. And now it is beginning to send signals. Not loud ones. Not urgent ones. Just a subtle sense that something essential has been missing for a long time. You are not depressed. You are disconnected from your own emotional center. And the moment you start to notice that, not with panic, but with honesty, is the moment your soul begins to breathe again. Not because everything changes, but because you finally stop pretending that emotional emptiness is the same thing as peace. There is a moment that comes after emotional quiet. Not the kind that feels peaceful. The kind that feels revealing. It is when you suddenly realize that the life you are inside no longer recognizes who you have become. Not in a dramatic way. Not with conflict or crisis. Just a soft, unsettling awareness that you are living in a structure built for someone you no longer are. The rooms still fit your body, but not your mind. The routines still work, but they do not nourish. You are not bored with life. You are outgrowing the version of yourself that created it. And that is one of the most uncomfortable truths for Aquarius. Because you are not someone who changes lightly. You invest deeply. You commit seriously. You build long-term. So when your inner world shifts, it creates a quiet kind of grief. Not for what you lost, but for what no longer feels honest. You look at your life and think nothing is technically wrong. And yet something inside you keeps whispering, this does not feel like me anymore. You are not craving escape. You are craving alignment. The kind where your outer world reflects your current emotional reality. But right now, it reflects an earlier version of you. A version that needed safety more than depth, stability more than meaning, structure more than truth. That version served you. It protected you. It got you through important seasons. But it is no longer who you are. And the soul is very sensitive to that. It does not rebel loudly. It withdraws quietly. It starts pulling energy away from what feels outdated, not to put you, but to redirect you. That sense of emptiness you feel is not failure. It is a signal that your internal identity has already moved forward while your external life has stayed behind. And this is where many people get confused. They think they need to change everything, burn bridges, start over, reinvent themselves completely. But that is not what your soul is asking for. It is asking for honesty. Honesty about who you are now, not who you were when you made these choices, not who others expect you to be, but who you have quietly become. More emotionally aware, more sensitive to meaning, more connected to your inner world. You are no longer satisfied with simply functioning. You want to feel alive inside your own life. And that creates tension. Because the life you built is not bad. It is just no longer yours in the same way. So you begin to feel like a guest in your own routine. Like you are wearing a personality that fits but does not express you. And that feeling grows, not as panic, not as sadness, as distance. A subtle emotional distance between who you are and what your life represents. Let me ask you something gently. If you were to describe yourself today, without using your job, your roles, your responsibilities, who would you say you are now? Not who you used to be, not who people know, but the person you feel yourself becoming in quiet moments. Because that person is real. And they are trying to breathe inside a life that was not designed for them. Your soul is not saying this life is wrong. It is saying this life is no longer enough. And that is not betrayal. That is evolution. You are not meant to destroy what you built. You are meant to update it, to slowly allow your outer world to catch up with your inner truth, not with force, not with fear, with clarity. Because the moment you admit, I have changed without judging it, is the moment the next version of your life starts to quietly organize itself around you. Not because you are lost, but because you are finally becoming. There is a different feeling in the air now. Not urgency, not crisis, something quieter and much more final. It feels like standing in a familiar room and suddenly realizing the walls are too close. Not because they moved, but because you did. You are not just tired anymore. You are no longer able to lie to yourself about what feels wrong. The old tricks do not work. Distraction does not work. Logic does not work. You can no longer convince your nervous system that this life still fits. Conversations that once felt harmless now feel draining. Small talk feels heavy. Repeating the same days feels unbearable. Not dramatic, just intolerable. And that is new for you. Because in the past, you could endure almost anything as long as it made sense. As long as there was a reason. As long as it was useful. As long as it was necessary. But now necessity is not enough. Now your body wants meaning. Your mind wants depth. Your emotions want truth. You are no longer satisfied with surviving well. You want to exist honestly. And this is why this cycle feels different from all the others. Before, you were tired but still hoping things would improve. Before, you were unhappy but still adjusting. Before, you were uncomfortable but still negotiating. Now there is no negotiation left. Not with your job. Not with your relationships. Not with yourself. Something in you has crossed a line. Not a dramatic line. A quiet one. The line where your inner world no longer accepts emotional compromise. Where you cannot unsee what you feel. Cannot unfeel what you know. You begin to notice how much energy you spend maintaining a version of life that does not nourish you. How much emotional labor goes into staying aligned with expectations instead of your own truth. And your system simply says no more. Not with anger. With clarity, you stop tolerating what feels empty. Not because it is bad, but because it is insufficient. This is the kind of ending that does not feel like collapse. It feels like expansion pressing against old boundaries. Like growth that no longer fits inside the container. And you start noticing strange things. You feel irritated by routines you once accepted. You feel distant from goals you once chased. You feel unmoved by things that used to motivate you. Not because you lost passion, but because your emotional frequency changed. You outgrew the old emotional diet. What once fed you now feels bland. What once challenged you now feels repetitive. You did not become weaker. You became more sensitive to your own inner signal, more aware of what drains you, more protective of your emotional energy. more unwilling to sacrifice aliveness for stability. And this is why it feels uncomfortable. Because your life still belongs to the old rhythm, while your nervous system is already living in a new one. You are living in between versions, no longer who you were, not yet who you are becoming. And that in-between space is quiet, restless, and powerful. Let me ask you something gently. If no one expected anything from you, if no one needed you to perform, if no one judged your choices, what would you naturally move toward right now? Not what you should do, not what makes sense. What feels like emotional oxygen? Because that is where your next cycle is forming, not in logic, not in plans. In attraction, in what pulls your attention, in what makes you breathe deeper, in what feels alive instead of correct. This cycle is ending because you no longer fit inside it, not because you failed, not because it was wrong, but because it completed its purpose. It gave you stability, it gave you structure, it gave you safety. Now you need resonance. You need a life that responds to who you are, not who you were trying to become. And that shift does not announce itself with chaos. It arrives as quiet intolerance. The moment you realize you would rather face uncertainty than continue living in emotional stagnation. Not because you want to escape, but because you finally want to live. There is a very specific kind of fear that appears at this stage. Not panic, not anxiety. A quiet question that sits in your chest and does not go away. It sounds simple, almost practical. What happens if I let go? Not what happens emotionally, but what happens to my life? How do I pay my bills? Who do I become without this role? What will people think? Will I regret it? You are not afraid of pain. You have survived enough to know that pain passes. What scares you is uncertainty, the empty space between who you are now and what your future might look like. Aquarius, you are wired to think ahead, to map possibilities, to anticipate outcomes. So the idea of stepping into something that does not have a clear shape yet feels dangerous. Not emotionally, existentially, because safety has become your emotional anchor. Even if it feels dull, even if it feels empty, at least it is predictable. You know what tomorrow looks like. You know what is expected of you. You know how to perform your life. And there is comfort in that. A heavy comfort, but still comfort. Letting go means losing the structure that has been holding your identity together. Not just your income, not just your routine, your sense of who you are in the world. And that feels like standing at the edge of something without a map. You start imagining the worst. What if I fail? What if I disappoint everyone? What if I cannot rebuild? What if this is a mistake? But underneath all of that, there is another fear forming. Quieter, more honest. What if I stay? What if I wake up 10 years from now in the same emotional place? Functioning. Stable. Uninspired. What if nothing collapses but nothing ever changes either? That thought does not scare you loudly. It scares you deeply, because it feels like a slow disappearance. Not dramatic. Not tragic. Just a long life lived without emotional presence. And your nervous system feels that risk now. Not as logic, as instinct. You are not afraid of losing security. You are afraid of losing yourself without even noticing. The truth is, you are not being asked to destroy your life. You are being asked to loosen your grip on the illusion that safety is the same as fulfillment. Because right now, safety is keeping you alive. But it is not letting you feel alive. And you can feel that difference in your body, in the way you breathe, in the way your shoulders hold tension, in the way your mind keeps wandering towards something undefined. Not escape, not fantasy, just a sense that your real life has not fully started yet, even though you are already deep inside it. Let me ask you something gently. If fear were not part of the equation, what would you actually want to release? Right now. Not what should you leave. Not what makes sense to leave. What feels heavy in your system every time you think about carrying it forward? Because that is where your soul is negotiating. Not between success and failure, between stagnation and growth. You are not scared of letting go. You are scared of not knowing who you will be without the old version of yourself. But here is what I want you to hear. You are not losing anything essential. You are shedding what no longer matches your frequency. And that always feels like risk before it feels like freedom. The fear is not a sign you are making a mistake. It is a sign you are standing at the edge of emotional honesty, where your life is no longer organized around what keeps you safe, but around what keeps you real. And the deepest fear is not that you might fail. The deepest fear is that you might succeed in staying exactly where you are and never feel fully alive again. There is a softer feeling that arrives after fear. Not relief, not certainty, something calmer, almost tender. It feels like finally realizing that freedom was never about escape. It was about permission. Permission to choose again, not in a dramatic way, not by destroying what you built, but by slowly turning toward yourself with honesty. Breaking free does not feel like rebellion. It feels like alignment, like your inner world and your outer life beginning to speak the same language again. You stop forcing yourself into routines that no longer reflect who you are. You stop explaining away your feelings. Stop minimizing what you need. Stop calling emotional exhaustion maturity. You begin to listen instead of endure. And this is where something very important shifts. You realize that you do not need to disappear from your life to become present in it. You do not need to erase your past to honor your future. You only need to stop abandoning yourself inside the present. So the changes start quietly, not with big announcements, with small internal decisions. You give yourself permission to be curious again, to explore new ideas without committing to them, to learn without needing to monetize everything, to imagine without turning it into a plan. You create emotional breathing room. You begin to ask yourself different questions, not what should I do next, but what feels true to me now, not what is safe, but what feels alive, not what will impress others, but what actually resonates with my inner world. And for the first time in a long time, your life stops being something you manage and starts becoming something you experience. Breaking free is not about speed. It is about direction. It is about choosing to walk toward yourself instead of away from yourself. Even if you move slowly, even if you are unsure, even if you still carry fear, you are no longer frozen. You are no longer pretending. You are participating. And that changes everything. Because your soul does not need perfection. It needs honesty. It does not need a flawless plan. It needs emotional presence. It needs to feel that your daily life is connected to your inner truth. That your choices reflect your real self, not just your conditioned self. You stop waiting for the right moment. Stop waiting for confidence. Stop waiting for certainty. You begin with clarity. Clarity about what drains you. Clarity about what nourishes you. Clarity about what you no longer want to carry. And that clarity becomes your compass. Not external validation, not social expectations, not old definitions of success, just your internal sense of alignment. You start preparing without rushing, learning without pressure, exploring without needing guarantees. You open new emotional doors before closing old ones. You build bridges instead of burning bridges. You give yourself time to grow into the next version instead of forcing a sudden transformation. And that is the real freedom. Not leaving everything behind, but finally allowing yourself to move forward without guilt, without apology, without betraying what you feel. Let me ask you something gently. If you trusted yourself completely, what would you choose differently starting today? Not dramatically, not publicly, just internally. What would you stop tolerating? What would you start honoring? What part of you would you finally take seriously? Because breaking free is not a moment. It is a relationship with yourself. A decision to remain emotionally honest even when it feels uncomfortable, even when it feels uncertain, even when it changes the direction of your life. You are not running away, you are returning. Returning to your own emotional signal, returning to your own truth, returning to the part of you that knows exactly what it needs. And once you choose that direction, even quietly, even slowly, you do not need to rush, because you are no longer lost. You are simply becoming someone who finally feels at home inside their own life. Not perfect, not finished, but real. And that is the deepest form of freedom there is. And maybe the most surprising part of this entire journey, Aquarius, is not that your life is changing. It is that you already changed long before anything around you did. The signs were never loud. They were gentle, subtle, almost easy to ignore. A quieter heart, a deeper longing, a sense that something meaningful was waiting just beyond the life you learned how to survive. And here you are now. Not broken, not behind, not lost. Just standing at the edge of your own becoming. You do not need to rush into a new identity. You do not need to prove anything to the world. You do not need to have all the answers. You only need one thing. To keep choosing yourself even when it feels unfamiliar. Even when it feels slow. Even when it feels uncertain. Because the real shift is not in what you do next. It is in what you are finally willing to feel. Your truth, your needs, your inner voice. That voice has been speaking to you for a long time, not in commands, in invitations. Invitations to live with more honesty, more presence, more emotional depth. And the moment you stop resisting that invitation, your life does not collapse. It begins. Not as a dramatic transformation, but as a quiet return to who you were always meant to be. So, if something in this message touched you, if something felt strangely familiar, like it was speaking directly to a part of you that does not usually get attention, that is not coincidence. That is recognition. A recognition of yourself inside your own story. And I want you to know this. You are not walking this path alone. There are many Aquarians right now feeling the same subtle shift, the same emotional awakening, the same sense that their soul is ready for a different kind of life. A life that feels real. A life that feels aligned. A life that feels alive from the inside out. So if you feel it too, leave a comment and write, "I am ready, not for perfection, not for certainty, just for truth." And if you want to continue this journey with us, if you want to keep receiving these messages as your inner world evolves, stay here. Subscribe. Trust that the next chapter is already forming. Because this was never just a video, it was a mirror. And what you saw in it was not your past. It was your future quietly introducing itself. The journey is not ending here. It is only beginning. And the next message is already on its way.